October 1985. A cell in Monrovia Central Prison. The air thick with heat and fear. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf sits on the concrete floor, her back against the cold wall. Outside, she can hear soldiers laughing. Their boots echo down the corridor. She knows what those footsteps mean. She's seen it before. People who enter this prison don't always leave. 46 years old, a mother, an economist who once walked the halls of the World Bank and Harvard, now an enemy of the state. Her crime? Words. She stood before the Liberian Senate and called President Samuel Doe a fool. Not in private, not in whispers, in public, with cameras rolling. She told the truth about his corruption, his brutality, his incompetence. In a dictatorship, truth is treason. Doe wants her dead. He's made that clear. The guards have told her, execution is coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. In Liberia, under Doe's rule, these things happen quickly. No appeals, no mercy, just a bullet and a shallow grave. But Ellen isn't shaken, not anymore. She's been afraid before. She knows fear, but she also knows something else, something that will define the rest of her life. She knows she cannot be silent, not when her country is bleeding, not when children are dying in streets that should be schools, not when a dictator is burning everything her ancestors built. If she dies for speaking, then she dies, but she will not beg, she will not break. The cell door creaks open. 2 soldiers. They motion her to stand. This is it, she thinks. But instead of taking her to the execution yard, they march her to a different room, a small office. Behind the desk sits a military officer she doesn't recognize. He doesn't look at her, just slides a paper across the table. Sign this. It's a confession, an apology to President Doe, a promise to never speak against him again. She reads it slowly. Every word a betrayal. Every line is surrender. The officer taps his finger on the desk. Sign, and you go free. Refuse, and he doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. Ellen picks up the pen. She thinks about her children, her mother, her 4 sons who need her. She thinks about survival, about living to fight another day. The pen hovers over the paper. Then she sets it down. No. The officer's eyes snap up. What? I will not sign this. The room goes silent. The soldiers shift behind her, hands moving toward their weapons. The officer leans forward. You understand what you are saying. You are choosing death. Ellen meets his gaze. Her voice is steady. I'm choosing truth. If that means death, then Liberia will know what kind of man rules them. A man who kills women for words. A man afraid of the truth. She's gambling, betting that even a dictator fears becoming that kind of matter maker, that killing a prominent woman, a Harvard-educated economist with international connections, might cost Doe more than keeping her alive. It's a desperate gamble, but it's all she has. The officer stares at her for a long time. Then he waves his hand. Get out of here. They don't execute her. Instead, they offer her exile. Leave Liberia, never return, and live. Stay and die. She takes exile. But it's not surrender, it's strategy. As the plane lifts off from Roberts Field, Ellen looks down on Monrovia. Smoke rises from the city, her city, her broken, bleeding country. She makes a promise to herself, to Liberia, I will be back, and when I return, everything will change. But Ellen doesn't know, can't know, that it will take 20 more years, 20 years of war, of blood, of warlords and child soldiers, 20 years of Liberia tearing itself apart while the world looks away. And she doesn't know that when she finally returns, she won't return as a prisoner or an exile. She will return as president, Africa's first elected female head of state. But that's still ahead. Right now, in 1985, she is just a woman on a plane running for her life, carrying nothing but her conviction and her anger. And it will be enough.
October 29th, 1938, Monrovia, Liberia. A baby girl enters the world in a country that exists because of a dream and a lie. Her name is Ellen Eugenia Johnson. She is born into Liberia's mixed heritage. Her father's side descended from the Gola people, indigenous to this land for centuries. Her mother's side traces back to the Americo-Liberians, descendants of freed American slaves who arrived on these shores in the 1820s, carrying both liberation and colonization in their hearts. This duality will define her country. Liberia is land of the free, founded by former slaves who crossed an ocean to escape bondage only to create a new hierarchy on African soil. The Americo-Liberians, barely 5% of the population, ruled everything. They held power, they held wealth, they held the future in their hands, while the indigenous majority worked the land their ancestors had worked for millennia. Ellen grows up watching this divide, feeling it. Her father, Jamale Johnson, is the first indigenous Liberian to sit in the national legislature. It's a victory, but a hollow one. He is a token in a system designed to keep people like him on the margins. Her mother, Martha, comes from privilege, Americo-Liberian, elite. Their marriage is a bridge across Liberia's deepest fault line, but bridges can be fragile. Ellen is light-skinned enough to pass, educated enough to belong, connected enough to rise, but never fully inside, never fully accepted by the elite who see her father's blood as contamination. She learns early, in Liberia, who you are matters less than where you come from, and she comes from both sides of an impossible divide. At 17, she marries James Sirleaf. She's barely more than a child. He's handsome, ambitious, from a good family. It seems like the right path, the expected path. She has 4 sons in quick succession: Robert, Adama, Charles, James Jr. But marriage, she discovers, can be a prison with a ring instead of bars. James is violent, not always, not at first, but eventually, inevitably. The kind of man who uses his fists when his words fail, who sees his wife as property, not partner. She endures it for years because that's what women do in 1950s Liberia, because she has children who need stability, because leaving means scandal, shame, social death. But something else is growing inside her, something stronger than fear: ambition. She starts taking accounting courses, spending hours with numbers and ledgers while her children sleep. It's an escape at first, then it becomes a vision, a way out. In 1961, she gets a scholarship, Madison Business College in Wisconsin, America, the land her ancestors fled, now offering her freedom her ancestors sought. She leaves her husband, takes her children, crosses an ocean. People whisper, a woman leaving her marriage, taking her sons to a foreign country, unheard of, scandalous. She doesn't care. She's done caring what people think. At Madison, Ellen discovers something. She's brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. Numbers speak to her. Economics makes sense in ways marriage never did. She understands systems, structures, how money moves and nations rise and fall. She finishes her diploma and keeps going. University of Colorado, economics degree, then the crown jewel, Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, a master's in public administration, a black woman, a Liberian, a single mother at Harvard. In 1971, she returns to Liberia with degrees that open doors previously locked. She's appointed Assistant Minister of Finance. 20 years later, she'll be Minister of Finance, the first woman to hold the position. But Liberia is changing, and not for the better. President William Tolbert rules the country. He's Americo-Liberian, elite, old guard, comfortable, disconnected from the suffering of ordinary Liberians who watch their children starve while politicians feast. Ellen works inside the system, tries to reform it, but she sees the rot, the corruption, the inevitable collapse coming. On April 12, 1980, that collapse arrives. Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, a 28-year-old indigenous Liberian soldier, storms the executive mansion with 17 men. They find President Tolbert sleeping. They disembowel him, literally, cut him open and leave him to die on his bedroom floor. Then Doe rounds up Tolbert's cabinet, 13 men, Americo-Liberian, elite, the old guard that ruled for 133 years. They take them to the beach. Poles are erected in the sand. The men are tied to them, shirtless, some blindfolded, some not. Thousands of Liberians gather to watch, cheering. This is justice, they think. This is revenge for 133 years of oppression. The firing squad doesn't aim well. Some men take multiple rounds to die. The crowd roars with each volley. Ellen watches from a distance. Not at the beach, she's too smart for that. But she watches Liberia transform overnight from republic to military dictatorship, from bad to worse. And she makes a calculation. Doe is crude, uneducated, brutal, but he represents something real. Indigenous Liberian anger at decades of exclusion. If someone doesn't guide him, doesn't try to inject competence into his regime, Liberia will collapse entirely. So she agrees to work for him, serves in his government, Minister of Finance again, trying to keep the economy from total meltdown, while Doe consolidates power through fear and violence. But Ellen isn't naive. She sees what Doe is becoming, a tyrant who replaced one elite with another, who kills anyone who threatens him, who tortures dissidents in basements while the country bleeds. She knows she can't stay silent forever, knows that eventually she'll have to choose between survival and truth. That moment comes in 1985, in front of the Senate, with cameras rolling. She calls him a fool, and everything changes.
Nairobi, Kenya, November 1985. Ellen steps off the plane into East African sunlight. Free, alive, exiled. She has nothing, a suitcase, some clothes, her life, which is more than many who crossed Doe got to keep. But exile isn't escape. It's a different kind of prison, one without walls, but with borders that keep you from home. From your children who are scattered now, some still in Liberia, some in America. From the country that needs you, even as it banishes you. She finds work at Citibank, then the World Bank. They're happy to have her, a Harvard-educated economist, former finance minister, fluent in the language of international development. She sits in air-conditioned offices in Nairobi and Washington, analyzing African economies, writing reports about structural adjustment and fiscal policy. Good work, important work, but it's not enough. Every night, she watches news from Liberia. Those regime grows more paranoid, more violent. Opposition leaders disappear. Journalists are tortured. The economy collapses under the weight of corruption and mismanagement. And then, in 1989, everything explodes. December 24, Christmas Eve. Charles Taylor, a former Doe ally who fled to America after embezzling nearly $1 million, crosses from Côte d'Ivoire into Liberia with a force of barely 100 men. He calls them the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, the NPFL. They are armed with AK-47s and rage. Most are barely teenagers, boys who've grown up watching those soldiers brutalize their families, boys promised revenge and power. Taylor is charismatic, a medical Liberian by ancestry, but indigenous by claim, educated in America, escaped from a Massachusetts jail, now returning as a liberator, or that's what he tells them. Within months, his 100 rebels become thousands. They sweep across Liberia like fire. Not liberation, destruction. Villages burned, civilians massacred. The war isn't about freedom, it's about power, about who controls the diamonds, the timber, the ports. And the world watches, does nothing. Ellen watches too, from Washington, from Nairobi, and she knows what she has to do. She starts speaking, everywhere, anyone who will listen. She goes to the UN, the Organization of African Unity, the US State Department, European capitals. She testifies before congressional committees, writes op-eds, gives interviews. She tells them Liberia is dying. Children are being turned into soldiers. Women are being raped as weapons of war. The country is fragmenting into warlord territories where human life has no value. And she tells them something else, something that makes people uncomfortable. She tells them this is partially their fault. America created Liberia, supported it, turned the blind eye to 133 years of Americo-Liberian domination because it served Cold War interests, supported Doe's coup initially because he promised to be anti-communist, armed him, trained his soldiers. Now, those chickens are coming to roost. Some people listen, most don't. Liberia is small, strategic value, minimal, natural resources, not enough to matter to superpowers. Black people killing black people in Africa. The West has seen this movie before. They changed the channel. But Ellen doesn't stop. In 1992, she makes a decision that will haunt her for decades. Charles Taylor, by now, controls most of Liberia. His NPFL has besieged Monrovia. President Doe is dead, captured by a breakaway faction, tortured on camera, his ears cut off while he begged for mercy. The footage circulates. The world looks away. There's going to be an election. A peace agreement requires it. Warlords in suits pretending to be politicians. Taylor is running. So are others, including Ellen. She knows it's theater, knows Taylor won't accept defeat, but she runs anyway, returns to Liberia for the first time since exile, campaigns in a country where campaign rallies can turn into massacres. She comes in second, loses to Taylor, who wins with 75% of the vote. People ask her later, was it fair? She tells them the truth. People voted for Taylor because they were afraid. His campaign slogan was, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." It wasn't a promise, it was a threat. But here's what haunts her. She accepted the results. served briefly in Taylor's government as chair of the Governance Reform Commission, tried once again to work within a broken system. It doesn't last. Within months, she sees what Taylor really is. Not a liberator, a warlord in a presidential mansion, a man who funds wars in Sierra Leone by selling diamonds and timber, who disappears dissidents, who uses child soldiers as personal guards. She resigns, speaks out, and once again, she has to flee. Back to exile, back to Washington, back to the work of bearing witness. The years blur. 1997, 1998, 1999, the new millennium. Liberia bleeds. Taylor's regime becomes increasingly brutal. A second civil war erupts. Rebels, some genuine, some just new warlords, fight government forces. Monrovia becomes a battlefield. Hundreds of thousands die. Millions are displaced. Ellen is in her 60s now. Grandmother, elder stateswoman. She could retire, take a comfortable World Bank pension, spend her remaining years in peace. But retirement isn't in her vocabulary. She founds the Governance Reform Commission in exile, works with other Liberian activists, keeps pressure on Taylor, keeps Liberia in the international conversation. And then, in 2003, something shifts. Taylor is indicted by the Special Court for Sierra Leone for crimes against humanity, war crimes, using child soldiers, sexual slavery, trading blood diamonds. The evidence is overwhelming. The international community finally acts. August 11, 2003, Charles Taylor resigns, boards a plane to Nigeria. Exile for him too. Though his will be temporary, eventually he'll face trial in The Hague. Eventually, he'll die in a British prison. But that's later. Right now, in August 2003, Liberia has a chance. A transitional government is established. Elections are scheduled for 2005. Ellen is 65 years old. Most people her age are thinking about retirement, grandchildren, gardens. She's thinking about the presidency. People tell her she's crazy. Tell her Liberia isn't ready for a woman president. Tell her she's too old, too connected to the old elite, too intellectual for a country where most people can't read. Tell her she should make way for younger candidates, men, someone more electable. She listens to all of it. Then she decides to run anyway.
Monrovia, Liberia, January 2005. Ellen walks through streets she barely recognizes. The city of her birth has been bombed, burned, and brutalized into something unrecognizable. Buildings are skeletal ruins. Roads are cratered. Electricity, forget it. Running water, a luxury. The national grid is dead. The government is broke. The treasury is empty. 14 years of civil war have killed 250,000 people, displaced 1 million more. An entire generation has grown up knowing nothing but violence. Child soldiers, some as young as 8, still wander the streets with AK-47s, unsure what to do now that the war is over. They've forgotten how to be children. Some don't even remember their real names, only their war names. Colonel Blizzard, General Rambo, Captain Poison. These are the voters. These are the people Ellen needs to reach. She's running against 21 other candidates. But really, there's only one that matters. George Weah. He's everything she's not. Young, 38 to her 66. Male, a football legend. He played for AC Milan, Paris Saint-Germain, Chelsea. He won the Ballon d'Or, the only African player ever to do so. He's beloved,
a hero to millions of young Liberians who see in him their own dreams of escape, of glory, of making it. He has no political experience, no university degree, no understanding of economics or governance or international diplomacy. But he has something Ellen doesn't have. He's the people's champion. The campaign is brutal. Where supporters chant, "No more old people, no more educated people," they blame Ellen's generation for the war, for the corruption, for everything wrong with Liberia. They call her Iron Lady, but not as a compliment. They mean she's cold, disconnected, elite. They whisper she's not really Liberian, that she lived abroad too long, that she sounds too American, too intellectual, too much World Bank, not enough Monrovia streets. Ellen faces it head-on. She doesn't try to be someone she's not. She campaigns in Monrovia's markets, sits with market women who sell cassava and palm oil from wooden stalls. Women who've survived things no human should survive. Women who've watched their children starve. Women who've been raped by soldiers from multiple factions. She speaks to them in their language, not just English or formal rhetoric, but the language of survival, of endurance. She tells them, "I know what it's like to be afraid. I know what it's like to be beaten by a man who says he loves you. I know what it's like to run, to lose everything, to start over with nothing." The women listen because they hear truth. She tells them, Liberia needs more than love. It needs competence. It needs someone who knows how to negotiate with the IMF, how to attract investment, how to rebuild schools and hospitals, how to bring back electricity. Ware's campaign mocks her, calls her a book person, says books can't feed people. But Ellen has a response. Books build nations. Books created industries. Books sent men to the moon. Liberia needs books, needs education, needs expertise. The first round of voting comes on October 11, 2005. Ellen wins 19.8%. Ware wins 28.3%. No one has a majority. It goes to a runoff. Now it's just the two of them, the grandmother and the football star, the economist and the athlete. The world is watching. Not because Liberia matters strategically, but because of what this election represents. Can democracy work in a country that's been shattered by war? Can a woman lead in a deeply patriarchal society? Can competence beat celebrity? The runoff campaign gets ugly. Ware's team spreads rumors, says Ellen supported Charles Taylor, that she has blood on her hands. They show footage from the 1997 elections, her brief time in Taylor's government. It's effective. It's devastating. Ellen doesn't deny the facts. She can't. She did work with Taylor, briefly, before fleeing again. But she provides context. I tried to work within the system to change it. I failed. I admit that. But I never stopped fighting for Liberia. Never stopped speaking truth, even when it cost me everything. Still, the damage is done. Young voters turn away from her. They don't want complicated truths. They want a hero. And Ware looks like a hero. Ellen changes tactics. She brings in international observers, makes transparency her campaign platform, promises she won't be president for life like so many African leaders, says she'll serve one term, maybe two, then step aside. No one believes her. African presidents don't step aside. They die in office or get overthrown. But she means it. November 8, 2005, Election Day. Ellen wakes up before dawn, prays. She's not a particularly religious woman. Economics and pragmatism have been her gods, but today she prays. She votes in Monrovia, cameras everywhere, the world watching. Then she waits. The counting takes days. Ballot boxes transported from remote villages on foot. Some polling stations attacked by armed groups. Some ballot boxes burned or stolen. But slowly,
Results come in. November 11th, Friday. The announcement. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, 59.4%. George Weah, 40.6%. She's won. Africa has her first elected female head of state. Not appointed, not inheriting power from a husband or father, elected by the people. The international community erupts in celebration. Headlines around the world. Liberia elects grandmother. Africa's Iron Lady. History made. But in Monrovia, the mood is more complicated. Where supporters are devastated. Some protest. Some threaten violence. The country holds its breath. Then Weah does something unexpected. Something that changes everything. He concedes. Accepts defeat. Calls Ellen to congratulate her. It's the first peaceful democratic transfer of power in Liberia's history. January 16, 2006, Inauguration Day. Ellen stands before the Capitol building, partially destroyed, hastily repaired for the occasion. She wears a white dress, traditional Liberian fabric. She looks small on that stage, grandmother-sized, but her voice when she speaks carries weight. I stand before you today as the first woman elected to lead an African nation. I did not seek this position for personal gain. I sought it because Liberia deserves better, because our children deserve better, because our future depends on what we do next. She pauses, looks out at the crowd. Thousands of Liberians, young and old, war-scarred and hopeful. We have work to do, hard work, the kind of work that requires all of us. Not just politicians, not just elites, all of us. Because Liberia doesn't belong to one person, it belongs to all of us. The crowd erupts. Not everyone believes her, but enough do. Ellen returns to the executive mansion that night. The same building where President Tolbert was disemboweled in 1980. The same building Charles Taylor used as a warlord's palace. Now it's hers. She walks through rooms still scarred by bullets, past walls marked by fire. She finds the presidential office, sits behind the desk. The electricity is out. She works by candlelight. There are stacks of papers waiting. Economic reports, security briefings, debt documents. Liberia owes $5.9 billion in foreign debt. The entire national budget is $80 million. The math doesn't work. There is no electric grid, no clean water system, no functioning schools. The National Army is a collection of former warlords and child soldiers who need to be disarmed and retrained. Half the country can't read. Life expectancy is 42 years. Maternal mortality is the highest in the world. This is what she's won. The right to fix the unfixable. She lights another candle, opens the first file, and gets to work.
The Executive Mansion, February 2006, 3:47 a.m. Ellen is still awake, still working by candlelight because the generators only run 6 hours a day, and those hours are long gone. She's reading a World Bank report on Liberia's debt, $4.9 billion. For a country whose entire GDP is barely $500 million, the numbers are absurd, impossible. Most of that debt is from the Doe and Taylor regimes, money borrowed and stolen, used to buy weapons, fund wars, line pockets. Liberia got nothing but mass graves and burned villages. Now the international community wants repayment. Ellen closes the file, rubs her eyes. She's 67 years old. Most people her age are retired. She's running a country that shouldn't exist anymore. But here's what the World Bank doesn't understand, what the IMF doesn't see. Ellen speaks their language. She's one of them. Harvard-educated, World Bank alumna. She knows how these institutions think, how they operate, and she's about to weaponize that knowledge. March 2006, she travels to Washington, not as a supplicant, as a partner. She sits across from IMF officials and delivers a pitch that will become legendary in development circles. You want your money back, I understand, but here's the reality. Liberia cannot pay. If we try, we'll collapse. If we collapse, you get nothing, zero, and West Africa gets another failed state. She let that sink in. But if you forgive this debt that enriched warlords while our people starved, we can rebuild. We can become a success story. Proof that post-conflict reconstruction works. Proof that investing in Africa pays dividends. She's offering them something more valuable than money. Validation. A win they can point to. The officials lean back. This grandmother in traditional dress just backed them into a corner using their own logic. It takes years, negotiations, compromises. But in 2010, the IMF and World Bank agreed to forgive Liberia's debt $4.6 billion. It's the largest debt relief package in African history. But debt relief is just the beginning. The country needs everything. Ellen attacks problems like she's at war, because she is. Not with guns, but with spreadsheets and policies and sheer force of will. First, security. You can't rebuild if people are afraid. She goes to the United Nations, demands peacekeepers stay Ogunga. 15,000 blue helmets from dozens of countries, the largest UN peacekeeping mission in the world. But peacekeepers aren't enough. Liberia needs its own army, a real one, not the collection of warlords and child soldiers left over from the wars. She makes a controversial decision: disband the entire military, all of it, start from zero. Critics say it's crazy, dangerous, leaving the country defenseless. But Ellen knows something they don't. The old military isn't protection, it's a threat. These are the same men who committed atrocities, who raped and pillaged. You can't reform that. You have to start over. She brings in American military advisors, starts recruiting, vetting, training, building a professional army from scratch. It's slow, expensive, but it works. Next, electricity. When Ellen takes office, Monrovia has been without reliable electricity for 15 years. Businesses operate on generators, those who can afford them. Everyone else lives in darkness. She partners with international donors, secures funding, rebuilds the Mount Coffee hydroelectric plant destroyed during the wars. It takes years, but in 2016, lights come back on in Monrovia. Not everywhere, not all the time, but enough to matter. People cry when their lights turn on for the first time in a decade and a half. Something that simple, that basic, a miracle. Education becomes her obsession. Ellen knows what education did for her, how it saved her, how it gave her tools to fight, to survive, to lead. She declares primary education free, mandatory, every child, no exceptions. The international community applauds, but there's a problem. Liberia has almost no teachers. The ones who existed fled during the wars, or died, or never learned to teach. So Ellen gets creative. She recruits teachers from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, offers scholarships to Liberians to study education abroad.
opens teacher training colleges. She visits schools personally, sits in classrooms, talks to students. In one school in rural Nimba County, she asked a group of children what they want to be when they grow up. A girl, maybe 10 years old, stands up and says, "Madam President, I want to be like you." Ellen has to turn away because she's crying, and presidents aren't supposed to cry, but she does anyway. Then comes 2014, and everything nearly falls apart. March, a 2-year-old child dies in Guinea. Fever, vomiting, bleeding from the eyes. Ebola. It spreads to Liberia by June. First a few cases, then dozens, then hundreds. This isn't supposed to happen. Ebola outbreaks occur in remote villages. They're contained quickly, over in weeks. But this is different. This is spreading in cities, in Monrovia, among people who've never heard of Ebola, who don't understand why you can't touch the dead, why traditional burial practices, washing bodies, touching loved ones, are now death sentences. By August, Liberia is in crisis. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Healthcare workers are dying. They're the first to go because they have the most contact. People are terrified. Some flee into the countryside, spreading the virus. Others barricade themselves in homes. The international community panics. Airlines stop flying to Liberia. Borders close. Aid workers evacuate. Liberia, just starting to recover from war, is being abandoned again. Ellen doesn't panic. She can't afford to. She declares a state of emergency, imposes quarantines, entire neighborhoods sealed off. It's brutal. People inside are trapped, some dying, some healthy, all terrified. Critics accuse her of authoritarianism, of treating Liberians like prisoners. She doesn't back down. "I am doing what is necessary to save lives. History can judge me later." She goes on national radio daily, explains the virus, how it spreads, why traditional practices have to stop temporarily, why people need to trust healthcare workers, even foreign ones. "I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too. But fear doesn't defeat Ebola. Science does. Community action does. Trust does." It's the hardest sell of her life, asking traumatized people to trust institutions that failed them for decades, to let strangers in hazmat suits take their loved ones away, to bury family members without touching them. But slowly it works. International help returns. The US military builds treatment centers. Cuban doctors arrive. Médecins Sans Frontières expands operations. By 2015, new cases drop, then stop. Liberia is declared Ebola-free in May 2015, then cases resurface. Declared free again in September. More cases. Finally, in January 2016, the WHO declares the outbreak over. 11,000 dead in West Africa, 5,000 in Liberia alone. But it could have been so much worse. Experts predicted hundreds of thousands of deaths. Liberia's response, Ellen's response, saved countless lives. The world notices. Time magazine names Ellen one of the Ebola fighters, their person of the year. But she doesn't want recognition. She wants reconstruction again. Because Ebola destroyed what little economic progress Liberia had made. GDP contracted, investments fled. People are poorer now than in 2006. She's 76 years old now, exhausted. 2 terms complete, 12 years of relentless work.
Constitutional term minutes say she has to step down in 2018. Some advisors suggest she could change the constitution, stay longer. She is popular enough. She could argue Liberia still needs her. She refuses immediately. Absolutely. I promised I would respect term limits. I promised I would step down. I keep my promises. In October 2011, before her second term, before Ebola, she receives a phone call from Oslo. The Nobel Committee awards her the Nobel Peace Prize, shared with Lema Gubwe, the Liberian peace activist, and Tawakkol Karman from Yemen. The citation reads, "For their non-violent struggle for the safety of women and for women's right to full participation in peace-building work." Ellen flies to Oslo in December, stands on that stage, accepts the medal. In her speech, she doesn't talk about herself. She talks about Liberia, about African women, about what's possible when you refuse to accept that things can't change. I urge my sisters and my brothers not to fear the change that beckons, not to fear speaking truth to power. The price may be high, but the cost of silence is higher. The medal sits in her office now, next to files on infrastructure projects, economic reports, education statistics, because prizes are nice, but work is what matters.
January 22, 2018. The Capitol Building, Monrovia. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf stands on the same platform where she was inaugurated 12 years ago. But today, she's not taking power, she's giving it away. The crowd is enormous, tens of thousands. Many have walked for miles to witness this moment. Because what's happening today is rare in Africa, almost unheard of. A peaceful, democratic transfer of power from one elected leader to another. George Weah, the man she defeated in 2005, stands beside her, older now, 41. He ran again in 2017, and this time he won. The student has defeated the teacher. The footballer has become president. Ellen could be bitter, resentful. She spent 12 years rebuilding this country from literal ashes. Now she's handing it to someone with no governance experience. But she's not bitter, she's proud. Because this is what democracy looks like. Leaders who step down, opponents who become successors, power that transfers through ballots, not bullets. She shakes Weah's hand, smiles, whispers something the cameras don't catch. Later, people will ask what she said. She'll tell them, "I said, take care of our country. It's yours now." Ellen walks off that stage as a private citizen for the first time in 12 years. She is 79 years old, a grandmother, a Nobel laureate, a former president. And finally, after decades of fighting, running, rebuilding, finally, she's tired. But before we let her rest, we need to understand what she actually accomplished. Because the story isn't just about what she did, it's about what it means. When Ellen took office in 2006, Liberia was a corpse, not dying, dead. 14 years of civil war, 250,000 people killed, infrastructure obliterated, economy collapsed, institutions destroyed, an entire generation traumatized. The smart money said Liberia was finished Another failed state, another cautionary tale about Africa's inability to govern itself. Ellen proved them wrong. She didn't do it with charisma or populism or strongman tactics. She did it with competence, with grinding unglamorous work. She negotiated debt relief, rebuilt the military, restored electricity, expanded education, fought corruption, fired her own sons from government positions when they were found misusing funds. Her own sons. Critics said she didn't go far enough, that corruption persisted, that poverty remained endemic, that infrastructure was still inadequate. They're right. All of that is true. But they're comparing Liberia to functioning states. They should be comparing it to what it was. In 2005, life expectancy was 42 years. By 2017, it was 64. In 2005, primary school enrollment was 43%. By 2017, it was 94%. In 2005, the economy was $548 million. By 2017, it was $3.3 billion. In 2005, there was no rule of law. By 2017, there were courts, police, and prisons that mostly functioned. Perfect? No. Miraculous compared to 2005? Yes. But Ellen's legacy isn't just in numbers, it's in what she proved. She proved a woman could lead in one of the world's most patriarchal regions. She proved competence matters more than charisma. She proved that post-conflict reconstruction is possible, difficult, slow, incomplete, but possible. She proved that African leaders can respect term limits, step down peacefully, allow democracy to function. And perhaps most importantly, she proved that speaking truth to power, even when it costs you everything, can eventually lead to power itself. Think about that trajectory, from prisoner facing execution for calling a dictator a fool to president, from exile to inauguration, from victim of domestic violence to the most powerful woman in Africa. It's not a fairy tale. Fairy tales don't include prison cells and civil wars and Ebola epidemics. It's something better. It's real. After leaving office, Ellen doesn't disappear. She can't. That's not who she is. She becomes an elder stateswoman, advises other African leaders, speaks at universities, writes her memoir, "This Child Will Be Great," the nickname her grandmother gave her as a child. She joins boards, foundations, becomes a voice for women's leadership, good governance, African development. In 2020, at 81, she watches COVID-19 devastate the world, watches Liberia struggle with another epidemic. She gives interviews, offers advice, still fighting even from retirement. People ask her, was it worth it? The decades of struggle, the exile, the threats, the impossible work of rebuilding. She always says yes, without hesitation. Because she didn't do it for herself. She did it for the 10-year-old girl in Nimba County who wants to be president, for the market women in Monrovia who survived war and want their daughters to have better, for the country that deserves more than war and warlords and exploitation. But here's what Ellen understands that many people don't. Her work isn't finished, can't be finished, because building a nation isn't a project with an end date. It's a continuous process, each generation building on what the previous one left behind. Liberia today isn't perfect. Weah's presidency has been rocky. Corruption persists. Poverty remains widespread. Infrastructure needs decades more investment. But Liberia exists. It functions. Its democracy, however imperfect, is alive. That's Ellen's legacy, not perfection, possibility. She showed that African nations can rise from the ashes, that women can lead, that competence and courage can overcome chaos and violence. She showed that the title Iron Lady isn't an insult, it's a requirement. Because fixing broken nations requires iron, requires a spine that doesn't bend under pressure, requires the willingness to make hard choices, face criticism, work without recognition, and hand power to your successor even when you disagree with them. Ellen did all that, and in doing so, she changed what people believed was possible. Not just in Liberia, not just in Africa, everywhere. Because her story isn't really about one woman, it's about what happens when you refuse to accept that things can't change. When you speak truth even when it's dangerous. When you work toward a vision even when everyone says it's impossible. It's about the power of one person to bend history. Ellen is 86 years old now as of 2025, still alive, still speaking, still fighting in her own way. And somewhere in Liberia, there's a girl, maybe 10 years old, who's watching, learning, dreaming. That girl doesn't know it yet, but she's living in a country that exists because one woman refused to stay silent in a prison cell 40 years ago. That girl goes to school, free education that didn't exist before Ellen. That girl lives in a democracy, imperfect but functional, built from ruins. That girl looks at the world and knows, absolutely knows that being female isn't a barrier to leadership, because she's seen it, lived it. And maybe, just maybe, that girl will grow up to be president too. Not because Ellen made it easy. Ellen didn't make anything easy, but because Ellen made it possible. And possibility, once proven, is impossible to erase. That's the legacy of Africa's Iron Lady. Not what she built, what she proved could be built. Not where Liberia is, where Liberia can go. Not what one woman did, what every woman, every person, every African nation can do when they refuse to accept that struggle defines destiny. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf didn't just lead a country, she rewrote what people believed about Africa, about women, about post-conflict reconstruction, about the power of competence and courage. And in doing so, she changed history. Not by commanding armies,
Not by seizing power, but by earning it, wielding it with wisdom, and giving it away peacefully when her time was done. That's leadership, real leadership. That's the Iron Lady. That's Ellen. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if it changed how you see Africa's history and future, hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling us what inspired you most about Ellen's journey. And subscribe. Subscribe to Rise of African Nations because we're just getting started. There are hundreds of stories like this. Stories of African brilliance, resilience, leadership, and transformation. Stories the world ignored or forgot or never bothered to tell. We are telling them every week, and we need your support to keep going, to keep researching, to keep producing, to keep making sure these stories reach the world. You can read the full article with additional context and sources in the description below. This is Rise of African Nations, where Africa's true history gets told, where forgotten heroes are remembered, where the narrative gets reclaimed. Subscribe, show your support, help us keep making content that matters. Because these stories, they're not just history, they're inspiration, they're proofs, they're possibility, and the world needs to hear them.